What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the rogue format that we're going to see in the upcoming list, because with this ban list I think the rogue players are the most happy about. We got back so many cards that I just think that people are going to experiment with so many different stuff. So making a list like this was actually difficult. So if you don't see what decks you think are going to be really good, just don't be salty and just comment down below of decks that you think that are going to be really good that are not included in this list, just because it was very difficult to choose 10 decks for a list like this. Because rogue decks, I think they're going to thrive in the upcoming format, because so many good stuff that needed to get hit got hit, and we got back so many cards. So I actually had to include more decks for this list, just because I don't think that you can include for a top 10 decks just 10 decks. I could mention 20 decks that could be really good for the upcoming format that can actually do pretty much the amount of same results. So yeah, I just had to narrow it down at 10, and these are the ones that I came up with that I think are going to be slightly better than anything else when it comes to rogue formats. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the list. Now, we have to start with the absolute favorite one that people have just been memeing about for a long time, but now I think it's actually happening. So at number 10, we have Pendulums. Now, Pendulums with 3 Jokers and 1 Astrograph. Yes, Electromite is still banned, but that's okay, because Konami, even though they're not willing to bring back Electromite, at least they're willing to give us more cards back that are not Electromite. So I know that Pendulum players most probably have the most dedicated fan base out of any type of deck out there because of Thrift. So I know that they're going to experiment with all those strategies that they can do now with Astrograph and 3 copies of Joker. The deck is more consistent than ever. All those starters and all those extenders that the deck already has inherently, and because of the mechanic being broken. So I think the deck can actually do a lot, although it still has the same problems that it used to have. But I know that this deck can easily go from the number 10 in the rogue deck list to number 1. So I'm just hoping people do not give up on it again. So I just know that they're going to make it work this time. I know that in a format where we don't have a lot of unhealthy stuff, Pendulums can actually become the most broken thing, just because of how the engine works and how the mechanic works. And with all those cards back, especially Astrograph, which we know how broken Astrograph can be, they can actually make the deck work. Number 9, Altergeist. Now, Altergeist, we saw that it did have some success during the previous format, and the deck basically does the same thing. And Desires at 1 doesn't matter, because this deck plays Extravagance, so you don't really care. You can play Prosperity if you want, but nobody was playing Desires, so it did not lose anything. It only gained stuff just because of how much the rest of the decks got crippled, especially the best decks of the format. So when you're unprepared to not play against a deck like this, you're just going to get destroyed. This is one of those decks that it has a slow start, but once it gets rolling, it's absolutely impossible to stop. So I know that a lot of people still enjoy playing this deck, so they're going to make it work. This deck is absolutely fantastic, and for the trap decks, of course Eldritch is going to be better, but a lot of people don't really enjoy playing Eldritch, so Altergeist is going to be where they'll go, and this is why you're going to see this deck a bit, and you need to be prepared for it. Number 8, Adignister. Combo stuff, just don't leave the format ever. So Adignister is a deck that it's going to be much better than before for a sole reason. I think that Nibiru is going to be a much less represented card in the upcoming format, mainly because decks like Lyrlux Tri-Brigade got hit severely, same thing with Drytron. So I don't think people are going to play Nibiru, at least not in their main deck. So a deck like Adignister can actually do so well against normal interruptions, but against Nibiru it didn't have a way to play around that. So if it goes uninterrupted, it can actually use so few resources and produce such a powerful board and still have a full hand of cards it can play with. And because the deck doesn't require you too many cards to play, you can also fit in a lot of hand drops as well to counter the format. So I think this deck, if you're a fan of it and you enjoy it, I think this is where you should be playing it, because it's a deck that can do so much and can actually be really good because of the amount of hand drops that people are not going to play in this format, because hand drops are going to be way less relevant than they used to be because of the existence of Eldritch mainly, and because of all those other decks that lose to Nibiru are not as good anymore. Number 7, Drytron. Now, how the mighty have fallen. Drytron being a rogue deck, yes, I know that the deck is still playable, even without Eva, of course, but you have to play other cards. Maybe people will start playing the Megalith stuff to get back their cards on the graveyard, have extra renegades with Ultimateness. Maybe they'll choose to play pre-prep with Herald of Perfection, so you can use Dawn of the Herald to get back Benton in the hand, so you can use it multiple times this way. There are solutions, of course, to the 0 copies of Eva with 1 copy of Benton, but the thing is that it just doesn't do as it did before as consistently, and it's not as powerful as it used to be, just because you need to play other cards. So yeah, it did drop to a rogue deck, but I wouldn't say it's completely dead. I still think this deck can do a lot, because some people that are dedicated to this deck, they're going to find solutions. So I'm sure you're going to see it a lot, especially in the beginning of the format, because people like experimenting with decks that got hit in the ban list in the beginning of the format, just to see how good they are. Of course, if the deck is not good enough, it's going to drop in representation a lot, but in the beginning, in the first few weeks, you're going to see it a bit, so you need to be prepared. Otherwise, if you think that you're not going to see it at all, you're going going to lose to an Ultimateness Pass. So yeah, this deck can still do stuff, but again, I don't think it's nearly as good as it used to be because of the ban list. Same thing with number 6. At number 6, we have Lyrlusk. Now, the thing with Lyrlusk is that I think it's going to become a much better, more pure version of the deck than with Tri-Brigades, which is why I have it here. If you try to play it with the full Tri-Brigade package like they did in the previous format, I don't think the deck will work as well, just because of the fact that the extended Tri-Brigade is a level 2, which is Keras, so it doesn't have any direct synergy with the deck because the deck is a rank 1 spam, so you need to be able to get your Nervals to the field more consistently. So I think playing multiple copies of Nerval and maybe just one card to search with Nerval and making the deck more pure is going to make the deck more viable for the upcoming format and play more Lyrlusk, because the deck can still bring powerhouses like Utopic Future Draco and Ensemble Robin quite consistently, I would say. Even though it does have less searching power with the one copy of Recital Starling, you can basically replace the second one with a Princess Sprite, which is a kind of a plus depending on your luck, I guess, but I don't think there's any other alternative for that. But you just need another card to go for your top future, so this is why this deck, even though it's much weaker than it was, I still think that people will try it, and it's a decent deck. It's not a bad deck, because Seymour was the card that was just making the deck feel very unfair, not only because of Avian, but because you were not able to target all those cards. So I think now the deck is much healthier, and it's still really good. So if you were enjoying the deck before and you think it's dead, it's not dead. Try it out, give it a try, and you'll realize that the deck can still do pretty good stuff and can play a lot of hand drops as well. So this is why I think this deck is going to be at the number 6 spot for a rogue deck list, but of course it can go much lower or much higher depending on how much people figure out play with this deck, but still you're going to see it quite a bit, especially in the first few weeks, because just like Drydron, it's a deck that people will experiment with because it got hit super hard by the ban list, and they will try to see if it can actually be playable still. Number 5, Beat Trooper. Now, we've seen Beat Trooper can do a lot, and with Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, this deck is really powerhouse because you can do so much with Beat Troopers. The amount of extenders that insects have gotten is absolutely absurd, so you can very easily do your full combo and then end on Anaconda and use your Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. This deck has very few starters, but it doesn't need starters, because when your deck is full of extenders, what do you need starters for? You just make your extenders your starters, and if you open Scout Baggy, then good on you. You just have an extra power on the field, so you can make even more stuff. You have access to Cicada King, which is another negate. So yeah, this deck, I just think that makes sense that it's at number 5, and maybe it should be much higher, but I'm putting other decks above this because I think they have a much better time going second, which is something that I don't think Beat Troopers do as well, even though they do have as many extenders. It's the thing that they're relying too much on Phoenix Enforcer, in my opinion, and if Phoenix Enforcer ever gets hit harder, then you're going to see this deck drop off completely. But for now, I think number 5 is a good spot for the deck. Number 4, Madolche. Now, this is a deck I've been praising for quite a long time now, and I still am, because I just love this deck. I think it is a really good deck going first, going second, in main deck stuff that other decks can't, that absolutely destroy the meta. Cards like Dish Shifter, and of course, with the introduction of Small World, this deck became much more consistent than before. It's playing Prosperity, and with Small World, it basically never breaks. It's absolutely impossible. So, it's a really good deck going first, it's a really good going second with Tiramisu, so I know that a lot of people enjoy playing this deck. It's just that they're sometimes reluctant on whether this deck is good or not in the format, but I guarantee you, if you're a fan of the deck, try it. You're going to have a lot of success with it. I think it's really good, especially now. If you can afford everything that it needs, cards like Prosperity and Small World, you have a really broken deck to play with, and I know that Madolche players are going to rise up and make this deck work in the upcoming format. Number 3, Salamangreat. Now, Salamangreat, I know that it only got back one circle and it lost 2 copies of Desires, which can be seen as a nerf, but the thing is that Salamangreat doesn't really need Desires to work. It does have Buffalo for the draw power. I think getting specifically to Gazelle more consistently with 2 copies of Circle is much more beneficial than having extra copies of Desires, because you already have cards that can draw 2. Now, Salamangreat is a deck that loses to Nibiru, and it has become a meme how this deck's endboard is Nibiru token pass, but now people are not going to play Nibiru nearly as much as they used to in the previous format, mainly because decks like Drytron and Little Star Brigade got hit so hard, so at least they're not going to main deck it. Some people might still side it, but depending on how the format unfolds, people might even cut it from the side deck completely, and this is why I think Salamangreat, this is one of their formats so they can thrive, just because of the non-existence of Nibiru. And of course, the deck, we can arguably say that next ban list, it's going to have 3 copies of Circle. I think that's very fair to assume, because I don't think Circle is a card that should say a 2. I think it's fairly easy to go to 3. It's not as broken as it used to be, so it's going to become even more consistent, so the deck can only become better from here on out. So this is one of those decks that people enjoy because of how consistent it is, of how it does pretty much what it wants to do every single game, and it's similar to Altergeist. It has a slow start, but once it gets going, it's very difficult to keep up, just because of the amount of recovery the deck has and the amount of protection it can have with Bailing. links, so it's very difficult to get rid of the resources before they can actually get them back. So I think people are going to enjoy playing this deck once again in the format, and it's a fairly budget deck if you exclude access code, of course, but still, I don't think you even need access code to play the deck. If you don't have it, you can very easily win with transcode and the other link to Cyber's Monster, your jammer, so you don't really need to play access code if you don't want to afford it. So I think Salamangreat is a really good budget option that people are going to try it, especially because it got a buff from the ban list, so you're going to see it quite a bit. Number 2, Evil Twins. Now, Evil Twins, they've been playing with Eldritch for the past few months, but with the introduction of Sunny, I think the deck already has now on it the tools it needs to play on its own. Because the reason you were seeing it with other stuff, it's because it didn't have a way to go for game. It was very similar to Sky Striker, but the thing is that Striker had ways to use your opponent's monsters with Widow Anchors to go for game. This deck does not have anything going for it. But Sunny, I think, solved all the deck's issues, being able to have a beater that you can summon very, very easily, and also a beater that can cycle into 2 monsters that once gives you a draw and once gives you a pop. This deck now, as a pure version of the deck, can do so much. And the thing about Evil Twin is that it only needs 1 card to do the full combo. So whenever you have decks that can do as much as this with only 1 card and being able to incorporate all those hand traps to combat the meta, this is what people call a good deck in the TCG and in the OCG, of course. In Yu-Gi-Oh, the more you can do with less resources means that your deck just gets better and better because of how much you can get. So if you can keep a full hand and have a full field, this is what Evil Twin is basically it. So it also has extenders, so you don't really mind if you get hand trap. You have a special summon from the deck, you have extenders that can special summon the summons from the hand that are searchable, so the deck is resilient to hand traps as well. So I think the deck, it's a perfect fit for a good deck. So the thing about this deck is that it actually hasn't been seeing as much play as people thought it would, at least not yet. But the more other decks get hit, the better this deck is going to become, and you're going to see it a lot more, because it's one of those decks that is just waiting to become the #1 deck, especially the more formats we go into. And as long as we don't get new archetypes that are good, because basically we've been getting mostly good engines lately, not that many good archetypes. So if those good archetypes get hit, you're going to see this deck rise up even further. But even right now, it's still a really good deck, and you're going to see it, so you need to be prepared for it, because it's a deck that is very difficult counter, especially when you're trying to hand trap them, just because you know that they have so many extenders in the deck that the hand trap can easily go to waste. So you need to study exactly how to play against this deck if you don't plan on playing it. But if you like the deck and you want to play it, then go for it right away without any second thought. It's going to be really, really good. And for the #1 spot, I just had to give it to Heroes, because we did lose 1 Fusion Destiny, but we got a second copy of Hero Lives. And by next list, Hero Lives most probably is going to be at 3. And when that happens, you're going to see this deck skyrocket in popularity, because unlike any of the other decks I just mentioned in this list, this one has a fan base, and it's one of the most fun favorite decks of all time, because it's so nostalgic and so old school. People enjoy Heroes. There's nothing you can do about it. People will always find a way to play this deck. And again, the Nibiru issue I mentioned with other decks in this video, it's no longer an issue because people are not going to play Nibiru nearly as much as before, so they don't really care about that anymore. And with Enforcer, they had a really good way to play around Nibiru, to be honest. And the thing is that even if Fusion Destiny gets banned, like it did in the OCG, Heroes will still have access to Enforcer because of polymerization and the easy searchable Destiny hero monsters, so they won't really care. They're still going to be able to use this powerhouse of a card that other decks will not be able to use eventually when either Anaconda or Fusion Destiny get hit again. So this is why Heroes are just such a good deck, and with 3 copies of Hero Lives, eventually they're going to become much better, but the 2 copies help a lot too, even now, because you can just get your Shadow Mist and your Mask Chains more consistently. And one of the deck's biggest issues is that it had to go out of its way to search Mask Changes, which made the combo more awkward, because you had to use Shadow Mist's second effect but not the first effect, which is why you couldn't get another search. But with 2 copies of Hero Lives, you can do it more consistently. Hopefully with 3 copies next list, the deck is going to become even more broken. So I just know that people, since they love this deck so much, they're going to try it, and you're going to see it a lot, so you need to be prepared for it. So yep, that's the list, guys. Like again, all those decks, there are so many other decks that could basically replace any of them in the list, and the order doesn't really matter too much, to be honest. It's mainly because of representation purposes, but that changes from event to event, so you can't really be sure about that. So again, comment down below any other decks that you think are going to be good. I know that other decks I didn't mention, like Dinosaurs, are going to be really good. Cyber Dragons are going to be really good. There are so many other decks that I just couldn't include them all in one list, so I'm leaving it up to you to mention any other deck that I missed that I did not include in the list. We can basically make this an easy top 20, and it still doesn't change anything. So yeah, I'm counting on you guys to give me your ideas about what other decks you think are going to be good, and I just know that we're going to have a very good and diverse format, and I'm just looking forward to it like nothing else. So yep, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.